Hello, it's PSYCHOCORE. Before you settle in, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, only if you like what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to see who's joining us from around the world. Your father's shadow still controls you. Carl Jung's secret to breaking free. I found the letter when I was 34, hidden behind my father's old books, yellowed and forgotten. It was addressed to me but never sent, written the night before he left us when I was 7. Son, it read, I don't know how to love you the way you need. I'm broken in ways I can't fix. Maybe it's better if I just disappear. For 27 years, I thought he abandoned me because I wasn't enough. For 27 years, I lived trying to become worthy of love from a man who couldn't even love himself. And for 27 years, I was wrong about everything. That letter changed my life because it revealed the most dangerous truth about father wounds. The story we tell ourselves about why they left, why they stayed silent, why they hurt us, is almost always fiction. But that fiction becomes our reality. It becomes the invisible prison we build around our hearts. You see, Carl Jung understood something revolutionary about the father wound. He called it the father complex, not just the relationship with your actual father, but with the archetypal father living in your unconscious, the internal judge, the voice that tells you you're not enough, the shadow that follows you into every relationship, every job, every mirror you look into. And here's what Jung discovered that will shake you. That shadow doesn't belong to your father, it belongs to you. You created it, you fed it, you gave it power, and most terrifyingly of all, you've been obeying it your entire life without realizing it. Let me tell you about Marcus, 38 years old, successful lawyer, married with 2 kids. From the outside, everything looked perfect. But Marcus came to therapy because he couldn't stop sabotaging himself. Every time he was about to get promoted, he'd make a mistake. Every time his wife showed him affection, he'd pick a fight. Every time his children needed comfort, he'd become cold and distant. I don't understand, he told me during our first session. I had a good childhood. My father worked hard, provided for us. Sure, he wasn't very emotional, but he was there. He was responsible. That's when I asked him the question that changes everything. What did you have to become to get your father's approval? Marcus went silent for a long moment. Then, barely above a whisper, perfect. I had to be perfect. Never cry, never fail, never need anything from anyone. And there it was, the prison. The invisible mold his child mind created to survive in a house where love was conditional on performance, where emotions were weakness, where needing comfort was shameful. But Marcus's father hadn't demanded perfection. Marcus had invented that demand. His father was just a tired man doing his best. But 7-year-old Marcus interpreted his father's silence as rejection, his exhaustion as disapproval, his inability to express emotion as proof that Marcus wasn't lovable enough to crack his walls. This is what Jung meant when he spoke about the personal father versus the archetypal father. The personal father is just a human being with his own wounds, limitations, and stories. But the archetypal father is the godlike figure we create in our minds, the perfect father we needed but never had, the impossible standard against which we measure ourselves forever. Sarah's story is different but eerily similar. Her father was the opposite of distant. He was overwhelming, controlling, involved in every detail of her life. She thought this was love. She thought this was how men were supposed to treat women, so she married controlling men, one after another, each relationship a replica of her childhood home. I keep attracting the same type of man, she said. Why do I do this to myself? The answer is what Jung called unconscious repetition. We don't attract what we want. We attract what feels familiar, and familiar to our unconscious mind equals safe, even when familiar is toxic, even when familiar is destroying us. Sarah wasn't choosing controlling men despite her father wound. She was choosing them because of it. Her unconscious was saying, "This is what love looks like. This is how you know someone cares about you. They consume you completely." But here's where it gets really dark. Sarah's father wasn't trying to control her out of malice. He was terrified of losing her. His own father had abandoned him, and his unconscious solution was to hold on so tightly that abandonment became impossible. His control was his wound expressing itself as love. This is the generational transmission Jung spoke about. Trauma doesn't just affect the person who experienced it. It passes down like a genetic code, but instead of DNA, it transmits through behavior patterns, emotional reactions, and unconscious beliefs. Consider this. Your father's way of loving or inability to love wasn't random. It came from his father, and his father's way came from his father. You're carrying not just your father's wounds, but your grandfather's, your great-grandfather's. Generations of unhealed pain expressing itself through your relationships, your self-talk, your deepest fears. But here's what most people don't understand about father wounds. They're not really about your father at all. They're about the story you told yourself about your father, the meaning you assigned to his actions, his words, his silences. Think about it. Two children can have the same father and create completely different internal fathers. One child interprets dad's long work hours as abandonment. The other interprets them as sacrifice. One child sees dad's strict rules as lack of love. The other sees them as protection. The father wound isn't what he did to you. It's what you decided his actions meant about you. And that decision was made by a child's mind that didn't have the capacity to understand adult complexity, depression, trauma, or simple human limitation. Jung had a profound insight about this. He said that the child's relationship with the father creates the template for how they relate to all authority, all power, all masculine energy for the rest of their lives. If father felt dangerous, then authority feels dangerous. If father was absent, then masculine energy feels unreliable. If father was overwhelming, then power feels suffocating. This is why the father wound shows up everywhere. In your relationship with your boss, in your relationship with money, in your relationship with God or spirituality, in your relationship with your own masculine or feminine energy. The template your child mind created becomes the lens through which you see the entire world. Let me share something that happened to me that illustrates this perfectly. I was in a meeting with my publisher discussing a book contract. The conversation was going well, but suddenly I felt this familiar tightness in my chest. The voice in my head started saying, "You're not qualified for this. They're going to figure out you're a fraud. Just agree to whatever they offer before they change their minds." In that moment, I wasn't a 40-year-old professional. I was 7 years old again, standing in front of my father's desk while he reviewed my report card. Feeling small, inadequate, desperate for approval I was sure I'd never deserve. The publisher wasn't my father. This wasn't my childhood. But my unconscious didn't know that. It was responding to the archetypal father, the internal critic that sounds exactly like what I imagined my father was thinking about me all those years ago. This is what Jung called projection. We don't see people as they are. We see them through the filter of our unhealed wounds. Every authority figure becomes father. Every rejection becomes the original abandonment. Every criticism becomes proof of our fundamental unworthiness. But here's where the story takes a turn that most therapeutic approaches miss. Jung believed that the father wound, like all wounds, carries within it the seeds of our greatest strength. The very thing that broke us can become the source of our power, but only if we're willing to face it completely. He called this process integrating the shadow. Instead of running from the wounded father within us, instead of trying to heal it or fix it, we learn to dance with it. We acknowledge its presence without letting it control us. For Marcus, this meant accepting that part of him would always be the little boy desperate for approval. But instead of unconsciously seeking that approval from everyone around him, he learned to give it to himself. He became his own good father. For Sarah, it meant recognizing her attraction to controlling men as her unconscious attempt to heal her relationship with her father. But instead of trying to change these men or fix them, she learned to set boundaries with the controlling voice inside her own head. The father wound doesn't disappear when you do this work. It transforms. The desperate need for external validation becomes inner authority. The fear of abandonment becomes the capacity for solitude. The terror of not being enough becomes the power to define your own worth. But this transformation requires something most people aren't willing to do. It requires you to stop making your father, whether living or dead, responsible for your emotional life. It requires you to take full ownership of the story you're living now, regardless of how it began. This doesn't mean forgiving your father. Forgiveness is often just another form of spiritual bypassing. It doesn't mean understanding him or making excuses for him. It means recognizing that the prison you're living in now isn't his creation. It's yours, and because you built it, you have the power to unlock it. Jung said something profound about this. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The father wound only has power over you as long as it remains unconscious. The moment you can see it clearly, name it accurately and understand its origins, it begins to lose its grip on you. Let me tell you what this looks like in real life. Remember the meeting with my publisher. When I felt that familiar tightness, instead of becoming the desperate child, I took a breath and said to myself, that's the father wound talking. That's 7-year-old me trying to protect us from rejection, but I'm not 7 anymore and this man is not my father. Then I asked myself what I would say if I were my own good father in this moment. The answer was clear. You belong here. You've earned this opportunity through your work and dedication. Speak your truth and trust the outcome. This isn't positive thinking or affirmation. This is conscious parenting of your own inner child. It's learning to be the father to yourself that you needed but never received. The transformation isn't immediate or linear. Some days you'll catch the pattern quickly. Other days you'll be halfway through a self-destructive spiral before you realize what's happening. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is awareness. The goal is choice. Jung understood that the father wound, when consciously integrated, becomes a source of wisdom. The child who learned to read emotional temperature becomes incredibly empathetic. The child who learned to be self-sufficient becomes powerfully independent. The child who learned to perform becomes genuinely excellent at what they do. But these gifts only emerge when we stop running from the wound and start dancing with it. When we stop trying to fix the past and start creating a different future. The most profound moment in my own father wound healing came when I realized something shocking. I had spent decades angry at my father for not being the father I needed, but I had never asked myself if I was being the son he needed. I had created a story where I was the innocent victim, and he was the inadequate father. But relationships are always a dance between two people, each bringing their own wounds, needs, and limitations. This doesn't mean taking responsibility for his choices or minimizing the impact of his absence. It means recognizing that even as a child, I had agency in how I interpreted and responded to our relationship. I could have chosen curiosity instead of resentment. I could have chosen compassion instead of judgment. But children don't have the emotional resources for that kind of consciousness. That's okay. The child did the best he could with what he had. But the adult can make different choices now. Here's what I wish someone had told me 30 years ago. Your father was just a man, a human being with his own fears, wounds, and limitations. He wasn't trying to hurt you, even when he did. He was trying to survive his own pain, raise his children, and figure out how to be a man in a world that probably never taught him how to do any of those things well. This doesn't excuse harm or neglect, but it places it in context. It removes the mythological power we give to our fathers, whether we idolize them or demonize them. It makes them human-sized instead of God-sized. And once your father becomes human-sized in your mind, something miraculous happens. You become human-sized too. You stop demanding perfection from yourself. You stop interpreting every setback as proof of your fundamental inadequacy. You start treating yourself with the same compassion you would show any other human being doing their best with imperfect information and limited resources. The father wound work isn't about your father. It's about reclaiming your own authority to define who you are, what you're worth, and how you want to love and be loved. It's about recognizing that the prison you've been living in has no locks on the inside. You can walk out any time you choose. But walking out requires courage. It requires you to face the possibility that maybe your father did the best he could with what he had. Maybe he loved you in the only way he knew how. Maybe his limitations said more about his own wounds than about your worth. It requires you to face the possibility that you've been holding on to resentment because it felt safer than risking disappointment again. That you've been choosing familiar pain over unfamiliar freedom because at least familiar pain feels predictable. It requires you to face the most terrifying possibility of all, that you're not broken, that you never were broken, that you're a whole human being who had some painful experiences that taught you to hide parts of yourself, but those hidden parts are still there, still whole, still waiting for you to welcome them home. Jung believed that our wounds are not random. They come to teach us something essential about our own nature, our own power, our own capacity for transformation. The father wound comes to teach you about your relationship with authority, power, and masculine energy. It comes to show you where you give your power away and how to reclaim it. But the teaching only occurs when you stop running from the wound and start learning from it. When you stop seeing it as evidence of damage and start seeing it as information about what you need to develop within yourself. The good father you've been seeking outside yourself has been inside you all along, not as a fantasy or a consolation prize, but as a real capacity for self-guidance, self-support, and self-love. The work is learning to access that capacity and trust it more than the wounded voice that's been running your life. This is what Jung meant when he spoke about individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, separate from your parents' wounds, society's expectations, and your own unconscious patterns. It's the most important work you'll ever do because everything else in your life depends on it. Your relationships depend on you knowing the difference between love and familiar dysfunction. Your career depends on you knowing the difference between your authentic gifts and your compulsive performance. Your peace of mind depends on you knowing the difference between your inner wisdom and your wounded child's fears. The father wound has been your teacher all along. It taught you to be strong when strength was needed. It taught you to be independent when dependence felt dangerous. It taught you to achieve when achievement felt like survival. These aren't pathologies to be healed. These are survival strategies that served you well. The problem isn't that you developed these strategies. The problem is that you kept using them long after you were safe. You kept trying to earn love after you'd found people who loved you freely. You kept trying to prove your worth after you'd already demonstrated your value. You kept protecting yourself from abandonment by people who were committed to staying. The healing isn't in getting rid of these strategies. The healing is in updating them, in recognizing when they're needed and when they're not, in using your strength to support others instead of just protecting yourself, in using your independence to create freedom instead of just avoiding intimacy, in using your achievements to contribute to the world instead of just proving you exist. This is conscious living. This is what it means to integrate the shadow instead of being controlled by it. You're not trying to become someone different. You're trying to become who you actually are underneath all the survival strategies. And who you actually are is not defined by what your father did or didn't give you. Who you actually are is defined by what you choose to do with the life you have now, what you choose to create, what you choose to contribute, how you choose to love. The story that began with a wound can become a story of healing. The child who felt unseen can become the adult who sees others clearly. The child who felt unloved can become the adult who loves generously. Not because you've transcended your wounds, but because you've learned to transform them into wisdom. This transformation doesn't happen in therapy alone. It doesn't happen in books alone. It happens in the daily practice of treating yourself the way you needed to be treated as a child. It happens in the moment-by-moment choice to speak to yourself with kindness instead of criticism, to support yourself through challenges instead of abandoning yourself when things get difficult. It happens when you catch yourself seeking validation from others and choose instead to validate yourself. When you catch yourself performing for love and choose instead to risk being authentic. When you catch yourself bracing for rejection and choose instead to stay open to connection. Every time you make this choice, you're reparenting yourself. You're becoming the good father you never had, not as a substitute or consolation prize, but as the real thing. Because the capacity for good fathering, for guidance, protection, and unconditional love, doesn't come from having the right father. It comes from developing your own capacity to father yourself and others. This is the ultimate paradox of the father wound. It can only be healed by becoming the father you needed. And when you do that, you realize that you had the capacity all along. It was just buried under layers of hurt, disappointment, and misunderstanding about what you needed to do to be loved. You don't need to do anything to be loved. You are love. You are the love you've been seeking. You are the approval you've been chasing. You are the safety you've been trying to create. Not as spiritual platitudes, but as practical reality. You have within you everything you need to create a life that feels authentic, meaningful, and free. This is what Jung called the wounded healer, the person who has faced their own darkness and learned to transform it into light, not perfect light, not constant light, but real light that can guide others through their own darkness. Your father wound is not your life sentence. It's your initiation. It's the doorway through which you learn to become truly yourself. The question isn't whether you'll heal from it. The question is what you'll become because of it. The question is how you'll use what you've learned to contribute to the healing of the world. Because that's what we're all here for, ultimately. Not just to heal our own wounds, but to use our healing to help others heal theirs. To transform our pain into wisdom. To turn our struggles into strength that others can lean on. The father you never had is not gone forever. He lives within you now, waiting for you to recognize him, trust him, and let him guide you home to yourself. Not the self you think you should be, but the self you already are. The self that was there before the wound, during the wound, and will be there long after the wound has transformed into wisdom. This is your true inheritance, not your father's limitations, but your own unlimited capacity for growth, love, and transformation. This is what you were born for. This is who you really are, and it's time to come home to yourself. If you enjoyed this video, please support the channel, like, share, and subscribe. Please leave a comment telling us what you think of this video.